Beringia and the first peoples. You know, the Western Hemisphere today is complex with nationalities and ethnicities from all over the world. Ideas, cultures, and belief systems are as diverse as they are unique. But who were the first people to populate the vast landscapes of the Americas? And how did they get here? Before the arrival of the Europeans in the 1400s, the land, which would later become known as the Americas, was populated with thousands of unique Amerindian or Native American tribes, with varying languages, religions, customs, and ways of life. While some lived a very simple life, some lived in advanced societies, technologically advanced societies that could rival the top societies of Europe at the time. Now, historians estimate that by 1492, when Christopher Columbus sailed from what was now Spain and Portugal area, the Iberian Peninsula, to the New World, and to be more exact, the Caribbean and the Bahamas, that there were 2 to 18 million Amerindians living in the North and South America. That's a lot. So that brings us back to our question for this documentary is, when did the Amerindians populate the Western Hemisphere? And how? Historians strongly contest different theories. One more modern theory is that they came over the same way Columbus did, is from the Iberian Peninsula, taking boats. Another theory is that they also took boats from Japan or Eastern Asia. Yet another theory is that they came from the Southern Hemisphere, from Australasia into South America or Central America. But the most widely accepted or widely popular belief is that they came over from Beringia, which is the land between Siberia and modern-day Alaska. Let's take a closer look. Here on the left is Siberia, and on the right is Alaska. Now in the middle, obviously, is water. It's called the Bering Strait. Now, right now there's water, but tens of thousands of years ago, during the last ice age, there was no water. There was actually land there. You see, the water was lower because it was an ice age, and there was also like ice bridges, from being the last ice age, but also the land bridges. And this land in between was actually livable. People could live there. Now the theory goes is that these earlier Paleo-Indians, the first Indians that came over from Siberia, they were chasing megafauna. And I'll talk about that in the next, after this part of my lesson. But this megafauna were huge animals like woolly mammoths and giant horses and giant bison that were coming over across the Beringia, or the Bering, what is today the Bering Strait. And these early hunters were following them, obviously, because that was their livelihood. They hunted, and that's how they survived. Now, when did this happen? Historians believe between 30,000 BP. Now, BP just means before present, and 20,000 BP. So within that 10,000, that's a lot of years, obviously, but between that 10,000 years, it's believed that these early Amerindians, early Paleo-Indians, arrived in the Western Hemisphere. Now, this is before the end of the last ice age, which was just over 10,000 years ago. And to put that into perspective, the earliest civilization, and when I say civilization, I'm talking about societies that grew and built cities and had ideas and religions and rules and laws. The first known civilization is Mesopotamia. And now Mesopotamia is before China, it's before Egypt, it's before the Indus River Valley and what is modern-day India. So Mesopotamia is very, very old, but you can see from this timeline the migration over Beringia was much, 20,000, 15,000 years before Mesopotamia. It's quite a long time. Now, I come back to the map here because I just want to make a few pointers. Now, if you see here, my pen right here. Now, this is Beringia. Okay. Now, I believe through books and through class, it's often taught as they just kind of came over the bridge here, and they just slowly populated, Alaska and Canada, all the way down to modern day United States, to the southern tip of South America. Now, that is true, but in actuality, they lived on this land for hundreds or even thousands of years and slowly made their way over to the Western Hemisphere. Now, this is during the Ice Age. It was not easy to go south because everything was ice, right? So they actually lived in Beringia for quite some time in hunting animals. There was plants they could eat from. So these are where they lived for many years. Now, I want to go back to the megafauna. I wrote it on the screen here. So megafauna is just these old, large animals that are extinct now. Now, the one on the screen here is called the mastodon, and the mastodon is just a hairy elephant. It's a little bit different than the woolly mammoth, which there also were woolly mammoth at the time, and there's archaeological evidence that they existed and that these early Paleo-Indians hunted them and survived off of them. In this picture is a giant sloth. Now, it's not like the sloth that you might see today. This is 3 times bigger than today's sloths. There were giant beavers, giant camels, giant bison, giant horses, all more than 3 times bigger than what you see today. Now, just imagine a bison 3 times the size of it is today. That's gigantic. Now, these all have gone extinct. They all went extinct about the ending of the last ice age. Now, it's believed that they went extinct because of the last ice age. Lakes dried up, their habitats changed, they slowly died out. But it's also believed that possibly the Amerindians, the Paleo-Indians, these first peoples in the Western Hemisphere, helped them go extinct because they hunted them. But nonetheless, they're not there anymore today. Of course, today there's some bison, today there's beavers, today there's horses. But that's another interesting point, is the horses. These giant horses that went extinct, well, the new horses that you see today are the ones that came in the 14 or 1500s, came from Europe. So for many thousands of years, there were no horses in the Western Hemisphere. Now, if you take a look at this map, this is the last ice age. Like I said, just over 10,000 years ago, the ice melted, right? And the last ice age was over. Now, this, of course, changed the world. It was the end of the last ice age. Oceans rose. What did they do when they rose? Well, Beringia, and let me get my pen again. Right here, I don't know if you see me in the upper left-hand corner, Beringia. Well, that turned into the Bering Strait. The water came up. The land bridge was gone. Now, let's see here. Now, what else happened? Ice sheets melted. Now, let me get my pen again. This was all ice. All to somewhere around Canada, the middle of Canada, and all the way to the north, it was ice. So, though the Paleo-Indians did get through those ice caps after getting to Alaska and crossing Beringia, there's archaeological proof of that, and I'll discuss that later. But after the ice sheets melted, it became much easier to travel south. And not just by foot and overland, they also took boats along the coasts. And eventually they would end up all the way down here to the bottom of South America. That would take hundreds and thousands of years, but it would eventually happen. Okay. Now, the next thing is green forests. They grew. They became much greener. The habitats changed. The lakes dried up, like I mentioned earlier. There's more and more forest. So that changed the way the early Paleo-Indians lived. Lakes dried up. I've already mentioned that. And the megafauna would go extinct. I've already mentioned that as well. But the Amerindians would continue to populate the Americas. It made it much easier after the end of the last ice age for them to expand and go from all corners of the Western Hemisphere. Now I want to talk about one of the earliest cultures, the earliest people that was, after the Paleo-Indians and Beringia, the ones that populated what is today North America and South America. And they are called the Clovis People or the Clovis Culture. Now, these people. Now, first of all, I must mention that they are the first peoples in the Western Hemisphere is highly disputed and contested. In fact, there is evidence saying that some earlier archaeological evidence or earlier peoples, other than the Clovis, survived in South America, more specifically in modern-day Brazil and Chile. Now, that would challenge the theory that the early Paleo-Indians crossed Beringia, but nonetheless, it has been widely studied that the Clovis culture was, if not the first, one of the earliest cultures in the Western Hemisphere. Now, why are they called the Clovis culture? Well, they're called the Clovis culture is because you see these arrows with these unique designs meant to make it easier to cut and to kill large prey. For example, the woolly mammoth and the large giant bison. These were discovered in some archaeological digs in a place called Clovis, New Mexico. So that's where they get the name Clovis culture. Now, that by the way, that discovery was in 1932. Now, from this archaeological site and other ones, which are scattered around what is modern-day USA, and in Central America, Nicaragua, and even down in Chile, it has been discovered that they came quite a long time ago. They came, possibly as early as 20,000 years ago. That's about the time of the Beringia crossing, and that is during the last ice age. So I have my timeline here again, and again here if you look on the left, we have the Amerindians migrating to the Western Hemisphere over Beringia. Well, Clovis culture was, for simplicity's sake, say around 20,000 years before the present to close to about 10,000 years before the present. This culture would eventually disappear. There's many theories of why they disappeared, possibly the end of the last ice age. There's even theories of a big meteor hitting the earth, but nonetheless, this culture would slowly die out. But something else interesting about the Clovis culture is what happened in Montana, right there in Montana. There was a burial site that was uncovered. This was uncovered, let me see, what year was that? That was in about the 1960s. They found to be exact, it's 1968. There was a burial site, and they discovered a little boy. They call it the Anzick boy. And it's called that because that's the name of the ranch where this burial site was discovered. But they discovered this little boy, and it teaches us lots of new things about this culture and the Native American cultures of today. And I will talk about that now. So the Anzick boy, what does this burial site teach us? Well, first, it teaches us that the Clovis people made it south of Canada during the last ice age, okay? So by looking at his remains and dating when those remains were there, plus other sites around the modern-day USA and Central America, they were able to determine that it was there more than 10,000 years ago. So that means they made it down through Canada, and I'm going to go back to my last page. I'm going to draw here. So they made it. Let me see. So again, this was ice, right? If you see me at the top here. They were able to make it through here during the last ice age. So it's believed there was some little gap or some little areas where they could travel through the ice to make it down to North America, Mexico, Central America, and all the way down to South America. Now, so I'll go back here. So number 2, it also shows that Clovis people were closely related to indigenous people in modern-day Alaska and Siberia. Now, why is that important? That supports the theory that they came over Beringia. And these are the Paleo-Indians that came over Beringia and stayed there for hundreds and thousands of years are the ancestors of these early Clovis people. That's why that's important. Just as interesting is there's a close genetic relationship of these Clovis people taking DNA from the Enzikboy to modern-day Native Americans, which is fascinating. That really shows that this culture were the first peoples in the Western Hemisphere. Of course, that is disputed, but this DNA evidence and the discovery of the Enzikboy really sheds a light on these early peoples that were living in the modern-day USA. Now, about that Enzikboy in 2014, his remains, as tradition and for the native peoples in the area, was reburied where the Enzikboy was found. But what they discovered from his DNA is really remarkable. Now, if you look at this timeline, we discussed the Clovis people and we discussed the early people in Beringia. But I want to say that it would be, if you look here, it would be many, many years. So this is about the Olmecs. The Olmecs are about 1,200 BCE. And the Clovis people were close to about 10,000 years ago, but you see the spread, the time between the Clovis people, who are hunters and gatherers and foragers, who are nomads traveling for the next hunt and gathering berries and gathering food so they could survive, to the first civilization, which is after Mesopotamia, which we discussed before, but the first civilization that would take place in the Western Hemisphere. Those are the Olmecs. After that, we would have the Chavin, the Cahokia, the Maya, which I think many of you have heard of, and the Aztecs, obviously all very, very famous as well, the Mississippian, and also the Incas. Those would happen all many, many, many years, many years after the Clovis people, where we have these first civilizations. So that just kind of puts in perspective how long ago these Clovis people lived. And more, I'm going to have some more documentaries. I'm going to cover some of these early major tribes and early civilizations like the Maya, the Olmecs, and the Incas. So please stay tuned. Thank you.